So today's project are push trays. So push trays can be different shapes and sizes depending on what you use for your push mold and how you cut them out on the outside. They can be plain and just geometrical. You can make your own ideas for cutouts here and make them a little more flourishy, a little more fancy. You can have your texture cover the whole inside or just on the inside of the bottom of it. You can add feet to the bottom if you like. Just think about if it's a longer piece, you might need more feet to prevent slumping. You can use these. They make great little hors d'oeuvre trays, butter dishes, and they're a great way to use your little leftover scrap. So if you're doing a project with slab building and you've got some extra pieces, you can make little sauce plates, little things for sushi, ginger or mustard or what have you, little bases for candle holders, little trays, little spoon rests. This one I actually added a little foot ring to make a spoon holder. So it's a great thing to use for leftover clays, but it's also a great project to use for making a nice appetizer tray or just embellishment tray. That little dish you want by the front door to put your keys and change in, things like that. To make a piece about this size, you can see the size of that, is about a pound maybe or so of clay. You might want to start with about 1.5 pounds to roll out to start with to make your tray. If you want to make a lot of them, of course, you can start with a bigger slab, or like I said, you can use some of your spare pieces to make smaller pieces. So let's learn how to make a push tray. These are the tools that you're going to need. A piece of foam. I use an outdoor seat cushion, but you can use any kind of foam, something that's fairly thick. You'll need a finishing sponge, a cutting tool like a scalpel or a Dolan knife or fettling knife, everyone's favorite red rib, some rollers or some sort of texturing tools, and you might want a ruler. In addition to that, we need the mold that we're going to use to actually push the tray that's going to become the inside of our tray. For our push molds, we need something with a really nice flat surface. So you can use cut pieces of wood, and then I just sand the edges so that they're not too sharp. You can use various size lids to different jars that you have. Just make sure they're very smooth. They don't have little raised sections in them, or sometimes they got the little point in the middle. So try to find a smooth lid. There are ones you can purchase that you use for different molds for hand building. These can also work for push molds. They comes in lots of different shapes. This is one I bought at Inseca from the GR Pottery Forms, so you can buy them there as well. Or you can make your own. We'll talk about that in another video. But you can also use your own molds for customizing and individualizing your own molds. So these are what we're going to use to actually push the clay in to help make the inside of the bottom of the shape. So the mold would be the part that fits down here inside this part. Okay? All right. So we're going to start with a slab that's about 1/4 inch thick, maybe a tiny bit less. And the first thing we're going to have to do to prepare our slab is to compress it with our good old red rib. I like to just moisten it first. And then I want to make sure I go in all different directions. So across, and diagonals, and different directions. This is going to help compress the particles. It's also going to help get rid of any texture that you might have from the rolling out process, from the rollers or the canvas or whatever else you were using. And then of course I'm going to do that to both sides. Okay, so when my slab is ready and prepared, I have to then let it get to the right dryness. So I want this to be leather hard in that my fingerprints are not going to make an impression. It's pliable enough that it's going to be able to move with the mold, but it's going to hold its shape. So if I lift a corner and it sort of stays there, that's about what I'm looking for. So after you prepare your slab, it might have to sit for an hour. You can cover it in plastic, maybe let it sit for a day until it gets to this stage that we want it at. Okay? So I need to decide how I'm going to cut this out. So the first thing I need to determine is what push mold I'm going to use. And then I can decide if I want to measure a certain margin around that. Do I want to just do a freehand cut, or do I want to create a template? So looking at the push mold shape that you're going to use, you can create a template. It could be out of newsprint or a magazine or paper, whatever. When I get one that I like to use file folders. So you could use a template. So if I'm going to use a template, I want to make sure that my slab is big enough for my template. So for a basic push tray size like this, you're probably going to need about 1.25 pounds, pound and a half of clay put down into a slab. If you want to make a bigger one, then you'll need a little more clay. Smaller one, there you go. So now I can decide if I want my texture to go just on the inside, on the bottom, or if I want to texture the whole thing. If I want to do just the bottom, I basically lay my template out and then put my mold where it's going to go, and then lift out my template, and then I can kind of mark the spots on the sides here for how wide that base of that bottom is going to be. Okay, so I can see that it's going to go from here down to about here at about this width. So this is going to fit about the size of a roller nicely. I'm going to start at my beginning points, line my roller up with these marks, and I'm just going to apply nice even pressure and a nice smooth motion all the way to my little end marks that I made. Now, if you want to do the whole thing, you would just roll maybe in 2 layers. You can also just use texturing tools, whatever you want to do. So now I've got my design down here in the bottom. So now I'm going to go ahead and put my template over. I can use these guidelines, sort of figuring out where that center spot's going to be. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and put this over. It tends to want to turn the other way. One nice thing about using a paper template or a file folder like this is that the moisture from the clay will sort of make this stick and hold to it. Nice thing about the file folder too is that it makes a nice edge that I can cut across. So I'm just going to go ahead and use my tool. If you are using something like a needle tool, make sure you're holding it down at a 45-degree angle and cutting. Don't cut straight up, that tears the clay. This will cut the clay. You can use a fettling knife, a Dolan knife. I like to use a scalpel, but use whatever works for you. And just follow that template or do a free form in the design that you want. And just cut all the way around. Okay, now that I've got that cut out, I can just remove my extra clay, go ahead and scrunch that up, put it back in my bag for use later. And I've got my shape cut out. Now I want to go ahead and treat these edges, nice rough cut edges. I don't want those to leave those on there. I'm going to use a dampened sponge and I'm just going to push down along those edges. I'm going to soften this edge and I'm also going to be beveling it a little bit so that it looks a little narrower. So it kind of tricks the eye into thinking this is a really narrow piece, and smoothing it round so it all looks about like that. So I'm going to do that all the way around this side and on the back side. All right, now that I have my slab all prepared, now comes the fun part. This is where I get my foam out. So I'm going to move this aside for a second. I'm going to get my piece of foam. I'm going to lay my clay directly on my foam, so make sure the foam is fairly clean. I'm going to put my mold, so this is face side up, put my mold and kind of make sure it's centered and where I want it to be. And I like to stand up for this part. Make sure I've got a good weight to use down. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and push down on the mold straight into the foam. And then I'm going to kind of rock it to the sides, all 4 sides. And then I'm going to just gently lift up these edges a bit. All right. Now, take my foam out. I'm going to flip this over. Now, you can use, if you need to set this on a piece of wood or a block or a brick or a couple of cans or whatever you need to do, you want to be able to turn it over so that your edges don't hit the table. So now I'm going to take my sponge and I'm just gently going to work those curves a little bit. And if I have any little tiny cracks, try to deal with those. If your clay is really cracked on the bottom, that means it was too dry. So you need to really moisten that clay back up and try again. a couple tiny little cracks, it should be okay. So I'm just going to kind of work that clay gently over that mold. Without gouging my nail in it, hopefully. Okay, like so. Now, if your clay is still a little on the wet side and it doesn't seem like it's going to hold up very well, then just let it sit on the mold and let it dry like this for a bit. My clay is pretty set up, so I'm not so worried about it. While it's upside down, now is also the time where you could put your stamp on it. Since you've got the nice mold to push against, to put your stamps on there, your potter's mark, your dates, what have you. And also you can use this time to put some feet on it. So you could just make simple cone feet. You could take a coil of clay and swirl them around and make those kind of feet. You could take clays and make them look like buttons, or just put some of your pattern on it, what have you. Make matching feet. You could do 3, you could do 4. I don't like to make them like really tall and skinny. Sometimes I just leave this plain and I don't add any feet at all. But if you do want to add feet, now's the perfect time to do that. So then after your feet are on and your clay is set up a little bit, then you can turn it over. And here's where you can kind of clean up your edges and make them the shape you want. So this is going to be a butter dish for me. Turn it this way. So I want to lift this up a little bit, and these are going to become my handles for the sides. So I'm just going to manipulate the clay a little, bring this up and bring this out like a little handle. And then my sides, I can scoop them. I can give them some shape there. Again, if your clay is just flopping around, then it's too wet to do this to. Let it sit a little bit and do this later. Sometimes I'll do this once and then I'll come back and I'll do it again. I'm actually going to leave my mold in here to give you something to press against here. And then I'll come back and work on it some more later after it dries and sets a little bit. Don't want to let it go too far dry before you get most of this manipulation done though, or it's going to start to crack on you. So since this is a butter dish, I'm thinking about the knife being able to lay in this corner, so I'm giving that kind of a little groove there, giving some movement to the sides. Maybe just this way. Yeah. Just play with it till you get the shape that you like. There we go. And there you have it, your first push tray. Hope you had fun making this project. See you next time.